The winter light in Sacramento does a peculiar thing to the old Victorians. It softens the paint, hushes the porches, makes secrets look ordinary. On F Street, late 1988, one of those secrets had a name and a smile. Dorothea Puente. Silver hair set like porcelain, cardigan buttoned just so, voice warm enough to melt suspicion. She ran a tidy boarding home for people who had nowhere else to land. Pensioners, the chronically ill, those who slipped through cracks and needed a quiet room and a kindly cup of tea. Kindly, she surely seemed. A county social worker, punctual, careful, the sort who kept promises in a binder, noticed that one of his clients, a gentle soul named Alvaro Bert Montoya, had gone silent. No calls, no appointments, not even a missed message. He traced the last known address to Puente's stoop, knocked, and met the grandmother everyone in the neighborhood adored. Bert? He ran off, dear, she murmured. A shrug, a sympathetic frown, the performance a concern. It should have ended there. It didn't. The social worker felt a thread under his fingertips, faint but real, and pulled. Sacramento police were invited for a welfare check. The officers found a house that was almost too neat. Beds made tight. Linoleum gleaming. A pot of something sweet on the stove to perfume the air. And in the backyard, flower beds tended with a caretaker's devotion. Soil turned recently, as if winter had no claim here. A gardener's pride, Dorothea said with a smile. A small dog scampered, then stopped, nose to the dirt, uncertain. Missing persons multiply in silence before anyone hears the echo. The local detectives started rolling old names against old addresses. People who had stayed at this house, drawn their Social Security, then vanished between one check and the next. Patterns were shy at first, then bolder. Beneficiaries rerouted, signatures that angled the wrong way, welfare mail that never reached its owners. Paper leaves a shadow, even when it burns clean. By then, the case had the attention of more than one agency. Sacramento's investigators took the lead, walking room to room, calendar to ledger, shovel to spade. Federal partners, including FBI analysts on the financial side, began quietly mapping the cash streams and identities that orbited Puente's boarding house. Cross-checks on entitlement deposits, alerts in national databases for names that shouldn't be moving, and a liaison to ensure that if this became a fugitive hunt, the net would be ready before anyone ran. The Bureau did not crowd the stage. Not yet, but their fingerprints were on the strategy. Data first, then the garden. A judge signed the paper that lets daylight probe where politeness cannot. When the team stepped into the yard with tape, flags, and measured caution, the street itself seemed to hold its breath. Neighbors leaned from windows. Reporters, not yet sure what they were looking at, framed shots of shovels and winter light. Dorothea watched, calm as a church pew, a sweater snug against the breeze. The first cut of spade met the earth with a dull, wet sound, the kind that narrows conversation to a single sentence no one wants to say. You can tell a lot from soil, how recently it was turned, what it tries to hide, how truth eventually rises through it like groundwater. The detectives traded a glance, the kind built over long nights and longer cases, and kept digging. They were about to learn that the sweetest house on the block was staged like a theater set, and the garden was not a garden at all. And when the ground finally gave up what it was holding, the story would leave the porch, leap city lines, and demand a federal net to close when the landlady in the cardigan decided to disappear. The earth gave way in heavy clumps, darker than the surface, clinging to the shovels like it knew its secret was about to be told. The first shape that surfaced was wrapped, indistinct at first, then undeniable. Human. Detectives froze, as protocol dictates, then called in the specialists. Crime scene teams worked the plot with deliberate hands, flags marking each new disturbance in the soil. The garden that had once been the pride of F Street was suddenly a graveyard. Each flower bed a ledger that vanished. Neighbors who had adored Dorothea Puente gathered at the yellow tape, whispering disbelief. She baked cookies for the block. She babysat once. She looked like someone's grandmother. The facade was cracking, but disbelief fought to hold its ground. As the bodies emerged, one, then two, then 7 in total, the investigation shifted gears. What had begun as a missing person check now had the gravity of multiple homicides. And when the whisper spread through Sacramento, It wasn't long before the FBI's role intensified. The Bureau had two angles: money and movement. Their analysts traced Social Security checks that still flowed, signed, cashed, and redirected long after the rightful recipients were underground. Every deposit was mapped, every withdrawal noted. Agents dug through federal benefit systems, flagging irregularities that state investigators could not see alone. Each anomaly strengthened the case. A blueprint of fraud built atop the bones in the backyard. But Dorothea? She played her part like an actress on opening night. She sat politely as detectives questioned her, glasses perched on her nose, voice trembling at just the right pitch. "I would never hurt anyone," she insisted, the grandmotherly mask never slipping. And then, with an audacity that still chills seasoned agents, she asked if she might step out for a walk, just to calm her nerves. Permission was granted. She slipped away into the Sacramento afternoon, swallowed by the crowd, leaving behind only a cardigan silhouette in memory. By the time her absence raised alarms, the landlady of F Street had vanished. Now the chase belonged as much to the FBI as it did to Sacramento detectives. The Bureau's fugitive unit began threading her face into national alerts, feeding composite images into airports, bus terminals, and border systems. They knew from experience. When killers flee, they seek anonymity, and anonymity leaves patterns. Phone calls, hotel check-ins, a slip of paper with the wrong name. The FBI had the reach to spot what local eyes could not. And somewhere in the sprawl of California, Dorothea Puente was breathing free air, watching the evening news, perhaps even smiling as her boarding house became the lead story. But even the best disguise is fray, and the Bureau was betting she'd step into the wrong spotlight before long. Dorothea Puente didn't run like a desperate fugitive. She drifted, as though slipping into another role entirely. While Sacramento detectives combed her boarding house, and the FBI widened their net, Puente checked into a modest motel in Los Angeles under an assumed name. She blended with the transient crowd, retirees, down-on-their-luck workers, wanderers with stories too jagged to question. She dressed plainly, spoke softly, and carried herself with the air of a woman no one would look at twice. But old habits trail their owners like smoke. Even in hiding, Puente sought what she had always craved: companionship, a sympathetic ear, someone she could charm. She lingered at bars and diners, striking up conversations with men who mistook her grandmotherly presence for innocence. One such encounter would unravel her freedom. A man she met at a bar found her oddly captivating. Polite, attentive, almost too eager to listen. But he recognized her face from somewhere beyond the dim lights and jukebox hum. Later that evening, he stared at the television, and the recognition hit him hard. The kind widow from the bar was the wanted woman splashed across national broadcasts. By then, the FBI's fugitive squad had spread Puente's image coast to coast. Agents coordinated with local law enforcement, instructing the public to treat her not as a harmless pensioner, but as a suspect in multiple homicides. Every call to a hotline was logged, cross-checked, and acted upon with speed. The tip from Los Angeles cut through the noise like a razor. Agents moved swiftly, liaising with LAPD to zero in on the motel where Puente was last seen. When they entered, she was calm, too calm, sitting on the edge of the bed with her suitcase neatly packed, as if she had been expecting company. The arrest was quiet, almost anticlimactic. No gunfire, no chase, just a frail woman escorted out under the watchful eyes of agents who knew better than to trust appearances. For the Bureau, it was a satisfying snap of a trap closing. For Sacramento detectives, it was a missing piece. Their suspect was back in custody, and the Garden of Secrets would finally have its day in court. But arrest is only the midpoint of a story. The real challenge, proving what lay beneath the soil, the fraud in the ledgers, the intent behind the grandmotherly smile, would play out before a jury. And it would take years before the full weight of justice bore down on the woman who had death beneath roses. The courthouse in Sacramento was crowded, buzzing like a beehive wrapped in marble. Journalists swarmed the steps. Sketch artists sharpened their pencils, and the public packed the benches for a glimpse of the woman whose roses grew above bones. Dorothea Puente entered each day with the posture of a Sunday school teacher. Modest dress, glasses perched low, hair arranged into a halo of white. She didn't look like a predator. She looked like someone's grandmother. That was her greatest disguise. Prosecutors painted a darker portrait. They laid out how residents of Puente's home, men and women already fragile, already invisible to much of the world, had disappeared one by one. They presented a ledger of deceit, government checks rerouted into her hands, signatures falsified, money siphoned while the rightful recipients were buried in her backyard. FBI specialists were called to the stand, their testimony clinical yet devastating. Analysts described the paper trail that crossed federal systems, how checks kept moving while the people who earned them had vanished. Their expertise connected financial fraud to the bodies unearthed, building a bridge of evidence too strong for sentiment to weaken. The defense leaned on perception. They reminded jurors of her age, her health, her grandmotherly demeanor. Could such a frail woman truly orchestrate such a grim enterprise? They suggested others in the house may have been responsible, that Puente herself was guilty only of poor judgment and misplaced trust. But witnesses spoke of her habits, of drinks laced with sedatives, of tenants who never returned from dinner, of whispered threats when payments fell short. Survivors who had left her boarding house before their names could be added to the soil described a pattern of manipulation, cloaked in courtesy. For weeks, the trial moved between horror and disbelief. And through it all, Dorothea sat still, eyes forward, her hands folded neatly on the table, as though she were listening to someone else's story. By 1993, the jury delivered its verdict. She was convicted of 3 murders, not all that prosecutors suspected, but enough to ensure she would never walk F Street again. The judge's sentence was life without the possibility of parole. The garden had spoken, the fraud had been mapped, and the mask of innocence had finally cracked. But even behind bars, the legend of the death house landlady would grow, and the case would stand as a lesson in how deception wears ordinary clothes, and how the FBI's reach, from ledgers of fugitive pursuit, can strip away every disguise. Prison does strange things to a reputation. For some, it erases them. For others, it magnifies every shadow. Dorothea Puente, once the soft-spoken landlady with the cardigan smile, became a ghost story behind iron bars. Inmates whispered her name like a cautionary tale, the grandmother who poisoned trust as easily as tea. Guards spoke of her quiet composure, her refusal to complain, her ability to adapt to routine as though she'd been preparing for confinement all her life. The Bureau kept its distance now, their role largely complete, but the echoes of their work lingered. FBI case files documented the meticulous way the fraud unraveled, the pursuit across state lines, the cooperation with local detectives. At federal conferences, analysts still use the Puente investigation as a textbook lesson. How to follow money trails when bodies remain hidden, how to balance cooperation between state homicide detectives and federal financial experts, and how a fugitive search can hinge on a single phone call from a watchful citizen. Puente herself, however, remained curiously unchanged. She never admitted guilt. To interviewers, she insisted she had only helped people, given them shelter, cared for them when no one else would. Her voice carried the same lilting kindness. Her words a mirrored persona that had fooled so many. They died of natural causes, she would claim, eyes wide with false sincerity. Yet the evidence, the bones beneath the garden, the checks that flowed like a siphon into her purse, said otherwise, and the world believed the evidence. As the years passed, Sacramento's F Street house stood like a scar in the neighborhood. Some avoided it. Others pointed to it like a landmark of infamy. For the FBI, it was a closed chapter, but one that agents referenced whenever they spoke of killers who wore disguises not of masks or weapons, but of kindness itself. Dorothea Puente lived out nearly 2 decades of her sentence in California's women's prison system. Age bent her frame, but never softened her story. In 2011, at the age of 82, she died behind bars. Her last chapter written not in freedom, but in confinement. Her death closed the file, but not the fascination. To this day, criminologists and FBI trainers alike point to her case as proof. Evil can sit in a rocking chair, smile sweetly, and serve you cookies, while hiding graves beneath the roses. Long after Dorothea Puente's death, her story lingers like smoke in the rafters of Sacramento. Tourists still pause on F Street, gazing at the Victorian boarding house where roses once grew above secrets. The neighbors who lived through it carry memories of disbelief, of watching detectives unearth bodies while the landlady's calm face lingered in their minds. For law enforcement, the case endures as a lesson written in caution and ink. The Sacramento detectives who first noticed the soil disturbed, the FBI analysts who traced the ghostly flow of Social Security checks, the fugitive squad that tightened the net in Los Angeles. Each piece of the investigation proved a vital chord in the symphony of justice. It was not just local persistence, not just federal reach, but their seamless collaboration that turned suspicion into certainty. At FBI training programs, instructors still cite Puente's case when teaching about financial forensics and the psychology of deception. It demonstrates how predators exploit vulnerability, how fraud leaves a trail even when bodies are buried, and how the Bureau's role, patient, methodical, relentless, can transform whispers of suspicion into an iron verdict. The public, meanwhile, has made Puente into a paradox. To some, she is a monster cloaked in lace. To others, she is proof that evil doesn't always roar. Sometimes it smiles, offers tea, and tends roses in the yard. Documentaries, books, and lectures keep her name alive, a reminder that appearances are the weakest evidence of all. In the end, Dorothea Puente's story is not just about greed or murder. It is about masks, the ones people wear and the ones investigators must learn to tear away. And it is about persistence, a social worker who noticed silence, detectives who trusted their instincts, and FBI agents who followed the trail where others saw only shadows. The house still stands. The garden is quiet now, but the case remains etched into the Bureau's chronicles, a testament to how even the most ordinary smile can conceal a ledger of death, and how, in the end, the FBI's steady hand ensured that the masquerade came crashing down.